There, I sat completely alone at my father's 60th birthday celebration, watching my entire family laugh and share stories around the main table while I perched on a wobbly folding chair next to the trash can. For 30 years, I had been the outsider in my own family, always treated like some unwelcome guest rather than their daughter and sister. But tonight would be different. Tonight would be the last time I ever allowed myself to be humiliated like this, because what happened next would shock everyone in that fancy Manhattan restaurant, including myself. Before I share what happened, that changed everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you have ever felt like an outsider in your own family, and do not forget to subscribe because this story gets wild. Trust me, you will not see this twist coming. Growing up as Marcus's little sister had never been easy, but I always thought things would get better as we became adults. My brother, 4 years older than me, had always been the golden child in our wealthy family. While he sailed through Harvard Business School and was groomed to take over our parents' chain of upscale restaurants, I chose a completely different path as a social worker, dedicating my life to helping families in crisis. This career choice had always been seen as a failure in my family's eyes, a waste of my potential and education. Our parents had built their restaurant empire from nothing, starting with a single diner in Queens and expanding to 15 high-end establishments throughout New York and New Jersey. Money had never been an issue in our household, but somehow, I always felt like I was living on the margins of their success. Marcus was the heir apparent, the one who understood business, the one who could carry on the family legacy. I was just the daughter who chose to work with poor families instead of rich customers. The dynamics had been established early in our childhood, but they became more pronounced after I was born. According to family lore, my arrival came during one of the most challenging periods in their business when they almost lost everything due to a kitchen fire and insurance disputes. While my parents never said it directly, there had always been this underlying suggestion that my birth was somehow connected to their temporary financial struggles, as if I brought bad luck to the family prosperity. When the invitation arrived for Dad's 60th birthday celebration, I felt a genuine spark of hope. Maybe this would be the opportunity to finally reconnect with my family as equals. I had just received a promotion at the nonprofit where I worked, and I thought perhaps they would finally see value in what I did for a living. I spent weeks preparing for this evening, buying an expensive black dress that I really could not afford, and taking the day off work to get my hair done professionally. Marcus had been in charge of organizing the entire celebration, which made sense since he understood the restaurant business and had connections throughout the industry. He chose Le Bernardin, one of the most prestigious restaurants in Manhattan, a place that specialized in exquisite seafood and had earned multiple Michelin stars. The guest list included about 30 people, a mixture of extended family, longtime business partners, and close friends who had supported our parents throughout their entrepreneurial journey. I arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, feeling confident and excited about the evening ahead. The restaurant's elegant atmosphere was breathtaking, with soft lighting, live jazz music playing in the background, and servers moving gracefully between tables with bottles of expensive wine. I had dressed carefully for this occasion, wanting to show my family that I could fit into their sophisticated world, even though my daily life was spent in community centers and low-income housing projects. The greeting I received was lukewarm at best. My parents offered polite kisses on both cheeks, but immediately turned their attention back to their other guests. Marcus was busy playing the perfect host, making sure everyone had drinks and engaging in animated conversations about business expansion plans and real estate investments. I stood near the entrance for several minutes, waiting for someone to tell me where I should sit or introduce me to people I did not recognize. As the evening progressed, I began to notice something strange happening. Every time I approached a conversation, people would suddenly find reasons to move away or change the subject. When I asked Marcus about the seating arrangements, he just smirked and told me to wait a few more minutes while he finished organizing everything. The main table was beautifully set with crisp white linens, crystal glasses, and elaborate floral arrangements, but there was clearly no place setting for me, Other family members who I had not seen in months were avoiding eye contact with me, which was unusual because we had always maintained friendly relationships at previous gatherings. Uncle Robert was deep in conversation with Marcus about some new restaurant location, while my cousins were clustered around my parents sharing photos on their phones and laughing about shared memories. The atmosphere was festive and warm, but I felt increasingly isolated from the celebration happening all around me. When Marcus finally called for everyone's attention to announce the seating arrangements, my heart started racing with anticipation. Surely now I would be directed to my place at the family table where I could finally participate in the conversations and feel like I belonged. Instead, what happened next would remain burned in my memory forever as one of the most humiliating moments of my entire life. Marcus stood up tall, commanding the attention of everyone in our private dining area. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had never been questioned or challenged about anything important. He began directing people to their assigned seats with the authority of someone accustomed to being in charge, pointing toward the beautifully appointed main table where my parents sat beaming with pride. Everyone received their assignments, gracefully moving toward elegant chairs with plush cushions and perfect views of the evening's festivities. Extended family members, business associates, and longtime friends all found their designated spots around tables that had been carefully arranged to encourage conversation and celebration. The crystal glasses sparkled under the soft restaurant lighting, and expensive wine was already being poured for the privileged guests who belonged at this gathering. When Marcus finished directing everyone else to their seats, I was still standing there, waiting for my assignment. The silence in the room became uncomfortable as people realized that the host's own sister had apparently been forgotten in the seating arrangements. I cleared my throat gently and asked where I should sit, assuming there had simply been an oversight in the planning process. That is when Marcus delivered the blow that would change everything. With that familiar smirk, I remembered. From our childhood, he looked directly at me and said, "Sorry, this table is for family only?" While pointing toward a rickety folding chair that had been positioned near the trash can area, close to where the restaurant staff were constantly walking back and forth to the kitchen. The chair looked like something that had been pulled from storage at the last minute, completely out of place among the elegant furniture and sophisticated table settings. The laughter that followed his statement was nervous and uncomfortable, but it was definitely laughter. People who had known me since I was a child were actually amused by my public humiliation. Some family members shifted in their seats and looked down at their plates, clearly uncomfortable with what was happening, but unwilling to speak up on my behalf. Others seemed to think this was some sort of harmless family joke that I should accept with good humor. As I walked toward that folding chair on unsteady legs, I could feel every eye in the room following my movement. The sound of my heels clicking on the restaurant's marble floor seemed unnaturally loud in the awkward silence that had fallen over our group. The chair was positioned right next to the service area, where I could hear the constant clatter of dishes being washed and the rapid conversations of kitchen staff preparing meals for the restaurant's other patrons. The physical discomfort was immediate and obvious. The folding chair wobbled every time I moved, and I was constantly being jostled by servers rushing past with heavy trays. The smell from the kitchen was overwhelming at times, a mixture of cooking oils and cleaning chemicals that made it difficult to enjoy any food that might eventually be served to me. I was close enough to the main table to hear their conversations, but too far away to participate meaningfully in any of the discussions. Marcus seemed to be enjoying my discomfort immensely. Throughout the appetizer course, he made several more pointed comments about my location, suggesting that since I was so close to the kitchen, perhaps I could help if the staff needed any assistance. "Oh, and Juliana," he called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Since you are so close to the kitchen, maybe you can help if they need anything. You know, put that service mentality to good use." The laughter that followed was louder this time, and I realized that this had been planned. This was not some spontaneous moment of cruel humor, but a deliberate attempt to humiliate me in front of our entire extended family and my parents' business associates. Uncle Robert even chimed in with his own comments saying, Well, at least she is used to serving others in her line of work. All that practice should come in handy tonight. As the evening progressed, the multi-course meal was served to the main tables with great ceremony and attention to detail. Premium ingredients like lobster thermidor and wagyu steaks were presented beautifully, accompanied by carefully selected wine pairings that the sommelier explained in detail to the honored guests. Meanwhile, I received what appeared to be items from the regular menu, and even those orders seemed to be wrong most of the time. The conversations at the main table flowed around topics that deliberately excluded me from any possible contribution. Marcus regaled everyone with stories about his recent business achievements, his latest luxury car purchase, and his plans for expanding the family restaurant empire into new markets. When people shared fond family memories, they somehow managed to choose stories from periods when I had been away at college or busy with my own life, effectively erasing me from the family narrative. During the toasting portion of the evening, every person at the main table was invited to stand and share something special about my father's 60 years of life. Extended family members told heartwarming stories about his generosity and business acumen. Business partners praised his integrity and vision. Longtime friends shared funny anecdotes about adventures they had shared over the decades. But nobody looked in my direction or suggested that I might also have something meaningful to contribute to this celebration of the man who had raised me. The servers seemed confused about my status throughout the evening. Several times, different staff members approached me to ask if I was part of the catering team or perhaps someone's personal assistant who was taking a break. When I explained that I was actually the daughter of the man being celebrated, they looked bewildered and glanced over toward the main table where my family was clearly having the time of their lives without any apparent concern for my welfare. Sitting in that uncomfortable chair, surrounded by the chaos of restaurant service, but isolated from my own family celebration, I began to remember all the other times I had been treated as an afterthought or inconvenience. This pattern of exclusion and minimization had been going on for my entire adult life. But somehow, I had always found ways to excuse it or blame myself for not fitting in better with their expectations and values. The memories came flooding back with painful clarity as I sat there listening to my family's laughter and animated conversations. I remembered Christmas mornings when Marcus would receive elaborate gifts like expensive electronics designer clothing and eventually even a car for his 16th birthday, while I received small token gifts or nothing at all. My parents had explained that they were saving money for my college education, but when the time came, they had been mysteriously unable to provide the same level of financial support that Marcus had received for his Harvard education. My high school graduation had been particularly devastating. While my classmates' families filled the auditorium with flowers, balloons, and proud relatives, my parents had been absent from the ceremony entirely. They had decided that attending Marcus's college orientation at Harvard was more important than watching me graduate as valedictorian from our local high school. When I called them that evening to share my disappointment, they had seemed genuinely surprised that I expected them to prioritize my graduation over their son's future. Throughout my career as a social worker, my family had never shown any interest in the work I was doing or the difference I was making in people's lives. When I told them about successful cases where I had helped families stay together or connected struggling parents with resources they needed, they would change the subject to something related to their restaurant business. When I was promoted to supervisor and later to program director, these achievements were met with polite indifference rather than the celebration that Marcus's much smaller accomplishments always received. Previous family gatherings had followed similar patterns, but I had always found ways to rationalize the treatment I received. At holiday dinners, I was routinely seated at the children's table, even well into my 20s and 30s, while Marcus enjoyed his place among the adults from the time he turned 18. When I brought romantic partners to family events, they were subjected to subtle interrogation and criticism that made it clear they were not welcome additions to the family dynamic. During my most difficult financial periods, particularly when I was completing my master's degree in social work while working part-time jobs to pay my rent, I had approached my parents for help. they had refused explaining that they believed in teaching their children independence and self-reliance. Meanwhile, Marcus had never paid rent, never worried about car payments, and had received a substantial down payment for his first house as a college graduation present. My attempts to reconnect with my family over the past few years had been consistently rebuffed or minimized. When I suggested family vacations where we could spend quality time together, they were always too busy with restaurant obligations or Marcus's latest business venture. When I invited them to visit my apartment or attend events that were important to me, they found excuses or simply failed to show up without explanation. As I sat there, absorbing the full impact of this latest humiliation, I began to understand that tonight's seating arrangement was not some cruel joke that had gotten out of hand. This was a deliberate statement about my worth and place within this family structure. Marcus had orchestrated this entire scenario to make it crystal clear that I was not considered a real member of this family, despite sharing their DNA and their last name. The wine continued to flow at the main table, and the conversations became louder and more animated as the evening progressed. People were sharing increasingly personal and sentimental stories about my father's impact on their lives and their gratitude for his friendship and mentorship over the years. The warmth and love that filled their voices as they spoke about him made my own exclusion from these relationships even more painful and obvious. When the main course was finally served, I watched as everyone at the family table received beautifully prepared dishes that had been specially selected for this celebration. The presentation was extraordinary, with artistic arrangements of premium ingredients that represented the chef's finest work. The wine pairings were explained in detail, and people were encouraged to savor each bite while appreciating the craftsmanship that had gone into creating this memorable dining experience. My own plate, when it finally arrived, contained what appeared to be a standard menu item that looked nothing like the carefully crafted dishes being served to the people who actually mattered tonight. The server seemed embarrassed as he placed it in front of me, clearly aware that there was a significant disparity in the level of service I was receiving compared to the rest of the party. As I picked at my food and tried to look like I was enjoying myself, I began to calculate what this evening was probably costing. Based on the wine selection, the premium ingredients, and the exclusive private dining room, I estimated that the total bill would likely be somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000. For a brief moment, I wondered who would be paying for such an extravagant celebration, but I assumed my parents would handle it since this was their special anniversary and they certainly had the financial resources. That assumption was about to be shattered in the most spectacular way possible. When the final course had been cleared away and the evening was beginning to wind down, our server approached the main table with a leather portfolio containing what was obviously the bill for our elaborate celebration. Even from my position near the trash can, I could see that it was substantially thick, suggesting a total that reflected the premium nature of everything we had consumed tonight. Marcus, who had been playing the role of gracious host all evening, accepted the bill with a confident smile. He opened the portfolio and took a quick glance at the total, and I saw his eyebrows raise slightly at the amount. $3,200 was clearly written at the bottom of the itemized list, reflecting multiple bottles of Dom Perignon premium seafood dishes, Wagyu steaks, and the exclusive use of their private dining room for the entire evening. Instead of reaching for his wallet or credit card, Marcus looked around the table with that same smirk I had been seeing all night. The conversations gradually died down as people noticed that he was preparing to make some sort of announcement about the bill. I assumed he was going to thank everyone for attending and perhaps make some joke about the cost of celebrating in style at one of Manhattan's finest restaurants. What he said next made my blood run cold and confirmed that this entire evening had been planned as an elaborate setup designed to humiliate and exploit me in front of our entire family. With theatrical timing that suggested he had been planning this moment all night, Marcus gestured in my direction and announced, "She will handle this tonight." The silence that followed his statement was deafening. Every person at the main table turned to look at me, sitting on my folding chair near the service area, their faces showing a mixture of anticipation and uncomfortable awareness that they were witnessing something that was clearly wrong. The server looked confused, glancing between Marcus and me as he tried to understand the family dynamics that were playing out before his eyes. Marcus continued with his explanation, his voice carrying the tone of someone who believed he was being perfectly reasonable. Since Dad's birthday was so special and Juliana is always talking about giving back to family, we thought this would be a perfect opportunity for her to show how much she appreciates everything our parents have done for us over the years. I realized in that moment that this entire evening had been orchestrated not just to humiliate me socially, but to exploit me financially as well. They had deliberately excluded me from the planning, segregated me during the celebration, and now expected me to pay for their expensive indulgences while being treated like an unwelcome outsider. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty and calculation. Everyone at the main table was now staring at me expectantly, waiting to see how I would respond to this demand. Some looked uncomfortable with what was happening, but nobody spoke up to object or suggest that this arrangement was inappropriate. The server continued to hover nearby, clearly unsure about how to proceed with this unusual family dynamic playing out in his restaurant. I stood up slowly from my wobbly folding chair, feeling the weight of every eye in the room following my movement. My legs felt unsteady, but my mind was crystal clear about what needed to happen next. I had spent 30 years accepting this kind of treatment, making excuses for their behavior, and convincing myself that family loyalty meant enduring whatever they chose to dish out. As I walked across the restaurant toward the main table, I could feel the tension building in the room. Marcus looked smugly confident, clearly believing that I would once again submit to their demands and quietly pay for their celebration, while accepting my status as the family scapegoat. The server extended the bill toward me, assuming that the family dynamics he had witnessed tonight were normal and acceptable. I took the leather portfolio from his hands and examined the itemized bill, carefully nodding as I read through the impressive list of premium items that had been consumed by the people who had spent the evening, making it clear that I was not welcome at their table. Multiple bottles of champagne, exotic seafood preparations, premium steaks, expensive wine pairings, and service charges that reflected the level of luxury they had enjoyed while I sat isolated near the trash can. Marcus was practically glowing with satisfaction as he watched me review the charges. "See," he said to the rest of the table, "she understands family responsibility." Several people nodded approvingly, apparently convinced that this arrangement made perfect sense, given whatever twisted logic had been used to justify this entire scenario. The moment had arrived for me to make a choice that would define the rest of my relationship with this family. I could continue the pattern of acceptance and submission that had characterized my entire adult life, or I could finally stand up for myself and refuse to enable their cruel treatment any longer. As I held that expensive bill in my hands, I felt something shift inside me like a switch being flipped after 30 years of being in the wrong position. I looked up at the expectant faces surrounding the main table, took a deep breath, and delivered the response that would change everything for all of us. With complete calm and a slight smile that probably looked mysterious to everyone watching, I addressed the server directly while making sure my voice was loud enough for every person in our private dining area to hear clearly. "I am sorry, but this is not my table." The confusion that spread across their faces was immediate and obvious. Marcus's confident expression began to falter as he realized that something was not going according to his carefully planned script. The server looked back and forth between me and the main table, clearly uncertain about how to proceed with this unexpected development in what he had assumed was a straightforward family celebration. I continued with my explanation, maintaining the same calm tone while gesturing toward the folding chair where I had spent the entire evening. "I was told very clearly tonight that this table is for family only, and as you can see, my table is over there by the trash can. Remember?" The logic of my statement was undeniable, and I could see people beginning to understand the implications of what I was saying. If I was not worthy of sitting at the family table during the celebration, then I was certainly not responsible for paying the bill that had been accumulated by the people who were worthy of that privilege. My table over there by the trash can did not order any of this expensive food or wine. I continued holding up the bill so everyone could see the impressive total. The people at this family table made all these choices, enjoyed all these premium dishes, and consumed all these expensive beverages. So the people at this family table should handle their family celebration. Marcus started stammering, trying to backtrack from his earlier statements, but the damage was done. He had spent the entire evening making it clear that I was not part of the family, and now he was discovering that exclusion works both ways. You cannot claim someone is not family when it comes to respect and inclusion, but then suddenly insist they are family when it comes to financial responsibility. I handed the leather portfolio back to the server with a gracious smile. These people at this table will handle their family celebration. They have made it very clear tonight that they are the family, and I am just someone who happened to be sitting near the trash can. The panic that spread across Marcus's face was immediate and satisfying. He began frantically reaching for his wallet while making desperate attempts to minimize the situation. Wait, he called out. It was just a joke, Juliana. Obviously, you know we did not mean anything serious by the seating arrangement. But it was too late for damage control. I collected my purse from beside the folding chair, maintaining my dignity and composure while chaos erupted at the family table. Marcus was scrambling to figure out how to pay a $3,200 bill that he had clearly expected someone else to cover. Other family members were reaching for their wallets and credit cards, trying to calculate how to split such an enormous amount among themselves. The argument started immediately. Uncle Robert was insisting that he had not ordered the expensive wine and should not have to pay for it. My cousins were pointing out that they had only eaten appetizers and should not be responsible for the main course costs. My parents looked shocked and embarrassed as they realized their son's cruel joke had backfired spectacularly and left them holding an enormous restaurant bill. Other patrons in the restaurant had begun to notice the commotion at our table. Well-dressed couples at nearby tables were glancing over curiously, clearly wondering what kind of family drama was unfolding in the private dining area of this upscale establishment. The server looked increasingly uncomfortable as he realized he was caught in the middle of a family conflict that was escalating beyond anything he had experienced in his professional career. As I walked toward the exit, I could hear the voices behind me becoming more heated as they struggled to figure out who would pay what portion of the bill they had never expected to handle themselves. Marcus was still calling my name, alternating between attempting to apologize and trying to minimize what had happened, but his words sounded hollow and desperate rather than sincere. At the restaurant's entrance, I turned back one final time to look at the scene I was leaving behind. The elegant table that had been set for family celebration was now the site of heated arguments about money and responsibility. The people who had spent hours treating me like an unwelcome outsider were now discovering what it felt like to be abandoned when they needed support. "Happy birthday, Dad," I called out clearly, making sure my voice carried across the restaurant. "I hope you enjoyed your family dinner." The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like the end of a very long and painful chapter in my life. As I stepped out into the cool Manhattan evening, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I had been carrying an enormous weight that I had not even realized was there, until I finally set it down. The walk through Manhattan's busy streets that night felt like a journey through a completely new world. Every step I took away from that restaurant seemed to lift another layer of shame and acceptance off my shoulders. My phone started buzzing almost immediately with texts and calls from various family members, but I made the deliberate choice to turn it off rather than allow them to continue manipulating me from a distance. I stopped at a small coffee shop that was still open late, treating myself to an elaborate dessert that I actually wanted, instead of whatever scraps might have been offered to me at the family table. As I sat there, savoring every bite of chocolate cake, I began processing the enormity of what had just happened and how it represented a fundamental shift in my relationship with my family. The next few days brought a flood of voicemails that ranged from angry to manipulative to desperately pleading. Marcus left several messages trying to convince me that everything had been just a joke and that I was being too sensitive about what he characterized as harmless family teasing. My parents left messages expressing their embarrassment about what had happened in front of their friends, but showing no awareness of how their behavior had contributed to the situation. Extended family members began calling to lecture me about family unity and suggesting that I should apologize for causing such a scene at Dad's birthday celebration. The irony of being asked to apologize for refusing to pay for my own humiliation was not lost on me, but it did help me understand how deeply dysfunctional the family dynamics had become over the years. However, setting boundaries with my family had an unexpected side effect. As I stopped accepting poor treatment from them, I also stopped accepting poor treatment from other people in my life. My relationships with colleagues at work began to deepen as I allowed myself to form genuine connections based on mutual respect rather than constantly trying to prove my worth through excessive accommodation. My dating life improved dramatically as I learned to recognize the early signs of people who might try to exploit my previous pattern of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice. For the first time in my adult life, I began forming relationships with partners who valued my opinions, respected my boundaries, and contributed equally to our shared experiences rather than expecting me to carry the emotional and financial burden of every interaction. I discovered hobbies and interests that I had suppressed for years while trying to fit into my family's narrow definition of acceptable pursuits. Art classes helped me express emotions that I had been holding back for decades. Hiking groups introduced me to people who appreciated nature and simple pleasures rather than constantly competing about wealth and status. Book clubs provided intellectual stimulation and meaningful conversations about ideas rather than endless discussions about business expansion and profit margins. The most significant change was in my self-worth and confidence. Through therapy sessions focused on family trauma and boundary setting, I began to understand how deeply my family's treatment had affected my sense of value and belonging in the world. Learning to advocate for myself in small daily situations gave me the strength to maintain my boundaries when family pressure intensified during holiday seasons and other traditional gathering times. 6 months after that birthday dinner, my life looked completely different. I had been promoted to program director at the nonprofit where I worked, finally receiving recognition for the meaningful difference I was making in people's lives. My apartment reflected my true personality for the first time, decorated with art and colors that brought me joy rather than items chosen to impress visitors who never came anyway. Contact with my family became limited to those few members who showed genuine respect and willingness to acknowledge the problems with how I had been treated. Marcus eventually offered what he characterized as an apology, but it came too late and was too focused on minimizing his actions rather than taking genuine responsibility for the pain he had caused. The most important lesson I learned from that evening was that family title means nothing without family behavior. Being related to someone does not give them permission to treat you poorly, and you are not obligated to accept mistreatment simply because it comes from people who share your DNA or your last name. I discovered that sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do, not just for yourself, but for the other people involved. By refusing to enable their cruel behavior any longer, I forced my family to confront the reality of their actions and the consequences of their choices. Some of them eventually grew from that experience, while others remained committed to their dysfunctional patterns. The peace that comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to accept less than basic human dignity is something that no family celebration or expensive restaurant meal could ever provide. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect and kindness, especially by the people who claim to love them. Your worth is not determined by those who cannot or will not see it, and you always have the power to walk away from situations that diminish your spirit. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who were taking advantage of your kindness? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it is okay to put yourself first sometimes. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve relationships that lift you up rather than tear you down. I hope you find the courage to create the life and family connections that truly serve your happiness and well-being.